Welcome to the Food Revolution Summit, where we explore how you can heal your body and your world with food. This is Ocean Robbins, and I am joined by my dad and colleague, John Robbins, and welcoming our guest, Dr. Joel Kahn. Joel is one of the top cardiologists on planet Earth. He's treated thousands of patients using natural and food-based therapies. And if he had his way, he'd prevent so many heart attacks that he would never need to treat another patient again. In addition to his practice saving lives as a cardiologist, Dr. Kahn lectures around the world inspiring health through proper nutrition. He's the author of multiple best-selling books, including The Whole Heart Solution and The Plant-Based Solution. He's also the founder of Green Space and Go, suburban Detroit's favorite plant carry-out cafe. So now, Joel, my dad and I are so grateful to you for your brilliant, life-changing work, and we're so glad to have this time with you. And now for this interview, I'm going to hand it over to my dad and colleague, John Robbins.
Well, thank you, Ocean, for that introduction, and thank you, Joel, for being with us once again.
Well, thank you both. And as you know, there is no bigger supporter of the food revolution. You had such an impact on my life in the 1980s. I was plant-based with no North Pole, and your book provided the North Pole. So here we are 44 years later, and your contributions are a big part of my persistence at this plant-based revolution.
Well, thank you. That is beautiful to hear. And I would like to ask more about your personal experience and journey. I mean, what brought you to this work? How did you get here? Most cardiologists are not trained at all in the power of nutrition, and here you are a leading advocate for it.
I basically walked into University of Michigan as a undergraduate who had already been accepted to medical school in a rather accelerated program. And I wanted to eat healthy like my mother cooked at home. And I wanted to also honor kosher diet laws. And there was a salad bar that was amazing, and there was nothing else. And I've never eaten an animal product since 1977, but I didn't know why. And I didn't know some of the background till I read your book, Diet for a New America. And then a few years later, Dr. Ornish came in my life, and it cemented what I was doing, but I was doing it for personal reasons. Now I have had the opportunity in 31 years of cardiology practice to teach every patient that this is the right choice. I can't force them, but many, many have jumped on board partially or completely.
You've written that heart disease is often like a cobra, silent in the bush until it strikes, and then it can be lethal. About half the time that men die suddenly of cardiovascular disease, they have had no previous symptoms. And this is important because heart disease today is claiming more than 600,000 lives every year in the U.S. It's still the leading cause of death in the country. And yet, Joel, our mutual friend and colleague, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, says that coronary artery disease is a toothless tiger that need never exist, and if it does exist, need never, ever progress. I want to ask you, Joel, as a prominent cardiologist, would you say it's true that with the whole foods plant-strong diet, heart disease in the Western world is largely preventable?
I would agree completely, and we have plenty of scientific data looking at cultures that eat plant strong and have no recorded heart attacks in like a whole country, like Uganda, traditionally, and maybe one heart attack in the entire country by population, a fraction of what would have been seen in a United States city. The problem is the first one you mentioned. If we could identify the early stages of heart disease, because it's completely asymptomatic, and then educate people that we can freeze it right here, we can halt it, and maybe even reverse it, but at such an early stage, then we'd have the upper hand on this disease. How do people find out they have heart disease? Typically, they're in the emergency room, they're in the coronary care unit, and they're in the cath lab, or they're in the funeral home. And that's a little bit too late to apply the remarkable miracle of plant-based nutrition to halt and reverse heart disease. So my approach is very much as Dr. Esselstyn is properly quoted as saying, but as a cardiologist, I'm very aggressive about early detection of heart disease. I want to reach people when they're well and maybe indeed already are starting to develop heart disease, but I'm giving them a chance to never become a cardiology patient by identifying the problem early. So yes, we got to identify that snake in the bush, and we have the technology. So I kind of say I'm a high fiber, high tech cardiologist. Eat plants, but I'm going to test you to make sure you're really as healthy inside as you look outside.
Well, Joel, it's clear that a whole foods plant-based diet is better for our arteries, it reduces risks for heart attacks and heart disease of all kinds. But then why is it that some vegans, and I would say particularly some long-term vegans, actually have heart attacks?
Great question. And, our best understanding is lifestyle, of which nutrition is the biggest piece of that healthy pie, but it's also sleep and fitness and avoiding smoking and managing stress, kind of the more classic Dean Ornish structure. Lifestyle probably is 80% of the cases of heart disease that manifest. My friend David Katz at Yale would say fork, fingers, feet. Where is your fork going? Are your fingers on a cigarette? Are your feet moving at the gym or in your backyard being active? You can control the large majority of heart disease and diabetes and cancer and brain disease and lung disease by structuring your lifestyle in a very healthy way, of which food is the most important of the choices, but they're all important. But that leaves 20% to genetics. It matters. It matters what your parents gave you. And I'll just give you one example. There's a form of cholesterol called lipoprotein little a, lipoprotein little a because it's lowercase a, that 25% of people inherit from their parents. It might drop a little bit with a whole food plant-based diet based on not enough science. And there is no prescription drug approved for it right now, but you could eat an excellent diet and still develop atherosclerosis due to inheriting a high level of that form of cholesterol. Now, good news is we're developing therapies for that form of cholesterol, and we're going to take 80% protection by lifestyle and add in the 20% that modern medicine can offer us to get as close to 100% protection from heart attacks as possible.
Have you ever treated patients who have elevated lipoprotein A with niacin?
Many, many, many times, and has the advantage. It's a B vitamin. It's been used to manage cholesterol since the 1960s. It lowers that LDL cholesterol that doctors talk to patients about, but it's one of the few agents we know of that can lower lipoprotein little a. It's an art to use niacin because of the flushing, because you have to watch for blood sugar, liver enzymes, but many people do very well. It will fade away as soon as we have an effective prescription drug, but that's about 4 or 5 years away.
So most people haven't heard of lipoprotein A. It's a type of cholesterol particle that can pose a heart attack risk. It's an inherited form of cholesterol. It's not widely known, but it certainly is capable of clogging arteries and heart valves. And I've seen some evidence that lipoprotein A may decline on a whole foods plant-based diet, become less dangerous. Joel, if you had elevated lipoprotein A, if you had that genetic condition, would you feel confident that a whole foods plant strong diet is the correct dietary path that would most favor your long-term freedom from heart disease and stroke?
Yes, absolutely well said. And I do have a practice full of patients with high lipoprotein little a. It's been a focus of mine. And everybody will hear about it and everybody will have it checked in the next few years as the pharmaceutical industry creates a hopefully very effective and safe solution, which is being tested. It's just going to take a little while longer. But if you have a risk factor that's hard to control, an inherited risk factor, which is what lipoprotein little a is, you want to control everything else. And the only logical conclusion is, have your cholesterol low, have your blood sugar low, have your blood pressure low, have your arteries and your endothelium functioning well by bathing them with dietary nitrates, leafy greens and beets and seeds like omega-3 rich chia and flax. Get your fitness, don't smoke, manage your weight, get your sleep. You really can reduce your risk. So I have many people with phenomenal elevations in lipoprotein little a that have super clean arteries because it's one risk factor. But a whole food, plant strong diet will help manage all the other risk factors and bring them, as close to perfect as diet can.
A few minutes ago, you mentioned Dean Ornish, our mutual friend and colleague, who has done remarkable seminal work in demonstrating the power of an optimally healthy diet and other lifestyle choices to reverse and prevent an ever-growing number of diseases that he's testing for. Joel, I'd like to invite your reflections on something that Dean has said. He said, and this is a quote, "I don't understand why asking people to eat a well-balanced plant-based diet is considered drastic, while it's considered medically conservative to cut people open or put them on powerful cholesterol-lowering drugs for the rest of their lives."
Right. It is so true that the perception is, and one of the reasons that a large number of physicians don't bring up nutrition at all or don't bring up whole food, plant strong diet, is it's just too hard. And of course, they've never done it. And it's very hard to promote something you've never done and don't have a positive experience with. The idea that you could survive without eggs and bacon and convert over to oatmeal is just felt to be too hard, or that you can learn to love a gigantic salad instead of a pepperoni pizza. That's too big a sacrifice, and I know when you talk to people who are on their way to bypass or stents or have had their heart attack or their stroke, and you talk to them honestly, would you have made changes 20 years ago if you knew this was coming? And, it's very rare to see a person that says, no, I wouldn't. And of course, they still need to do it at that point in their life. We need to re-change the paradigm and the thinking that drugs come first and surgery comes first and nutrition comes maybe not at all. There was a huge scientific study published in early 2020 called the ischemia trial, which was over 5,000 very sick men and women with advanced heart disease having symptoms, flunking stress tests. And half of them were not sent for bypass or stents. They were put on medication, but they were told to eat a low saturated fat diet, which has to be a plant strong diet. And they were told to get regular exercise 30 minutes a day. They did just as well, identically as well as those that had bypass and stents. So we are more prepared in 2021 than ever to say food first, food first, food first. And it's not something that's, from studies in the 80s and 90s. It's, this decade, we've confirmed it again in what is actually the most expensive cardiology research study ever done.
The U.S. today spends 2.5 times more per person on healthcare than any other country in the world does. And really, we shouldn't even call it healthcare because it's really more accurately disease management. 18 cents of every dollar we spend in this country for anything goes to disease management. And yet, even with all this spending, all this money, we have the highest rates of food allergies in children, of obesity in children, of diabetes in children, of dementia in older people. I could make a very long list of these sorry situations. Joel, behind all this data is an enormous amount of human suffering. What I want to ask you is, how much of this spending and this misery could be prevented if the food we all ate was optimally healthy?
It's not in the billions and single digit. It's in the tens of billions and possibly even hundreds of billions. And it is an awesome goal to shoot for. Just to remind the listeners, Dr. Dean Ornish, we mentioned, published his first major version of the lifestyle heart trial in 1990, then a 5-year follow-up in 1998. And part of that study of randomizing advanced heart patients to a healthier lifestyle with a plant diet was economic evaluations. And they were so favorable, he went to the insurers, Medicare and others, and says, this saves money. Of course, you're going to approve payment for patients who go through the Ornish lifestyle program. And they didn't. They turned it down. And it took 12 more years till, is that right? 12 more? 2010, yes, to finally get approval so that a person who's had a stent can go to an Ornish intensive cardiac rehab or a Pritikin intensive cardiac rehab program. And it was all based on the economic power of saving money by making patients healthier through food, through mind-body approaches of stress management. And, if we exploded that, even if we just took the study I mentioned, the ischemia study, we would stop doing about 75% of bypass and stent procedures, the elective outpatient ones, not the urgent emergency room ones, by teaching people, take your medicine, eat your plants, and take a walk every day. That's what the study showed. It works as well as bypass and procedures inside the heart with stents. But you'd shrink hospitals, you'd shrink cardiology groups, or you'd turn these places into lifestyle preventive centers, which would be wonderful. But somebody's got to lead the charge of changing the entire paradigm to save the American economy, and American employers, these hundreds of billions of dollars that we don't need to spend.
And so many people would live healthier lives. It's really a privilege to be able to do this work, to bring this information to people, because it is so life-giving. It is so beneficial in so many, many ways. I'm thinking about something that probably most of our listeners actually don't know about: produce prescription programs. They're a real thing. These programs enable patients with chronic issues like hypertension, diabetes, and obesity to access healthy foods at a subsidized price. Many of these produce prescription programs today operate through the USDA's Farmers Market Nutrition Program, and they're now happening in 49 states, so they're becoming increasingly widespread and available. Joel, are you familiar with produce prescription programs?
Yes, several versions of them, and some are within physician offices or hospitals, and some are just in the community. I spent a lot of time. Detroit, not everybody knows, my hometown, has the oldest continuous farmers market in the United States, the Detroit Eastern Market, and very well run and impressive commitment to the environment and the community. Anyways, they have what's called the Double Up program. If you have your dollars from the government because your income is low, and you come to the market and you use them on produce, the $5 coupon gets you $10 of produce. It'll only get you $5 worth of beef. So that's one example, and a wonderful example for sure. And then, of course, either physician offices that just recommend CSAs to get the box once a week during growing season. And then there are those few very forward thinking. I try and make an impact on my patients because I do have a healthy plant restaurant 5 miles from my office, and we're involved with a big teaching network that the public can use in Detroit. I don't have produce for sale in my office, but there are offices that do. And I literally was just listening to a lecture this morning, and it stimulated my brain. Why don't I do that? Go find a farmer who'd be willing to work with my patients, even if it meant they walk through the fields in the spring and summer and really connect to Mother Earth. Because none of us do that typically in a grocery store. We don't even have these thoughts. Go pet a cow. You won't want to eat one if you pet one.
It's true, actually. Even when the 4-H clubs, they have to do things to distance the kids from the animals so that they don't experience pain at the idea that the meat they're eating is actually the flesh of an animal that they maybe knew. That seems to vitiate against enjoying meat.
I agree completely. I mean, how many children in an urban setting get a lot of time around animals and can learn to love them? And it can be so transformative to hold a piglet or play with a lamb or pet a calf and make the association that that's bacon and that's hamburger, and that's veal, and hopefully get repulsed by that connection. It's just a package in, a saran wrap or cellophane that has no connection to where it came from. And, I didn't come to veganism or plant-based diets in that way, but, your book and my further experiences has led me to feel, passionately about the pain and suffering that, factory farm foods, only about 98% of, red meats and white meats and pork and fowl and fish that are eaten in this country are, under the worst of circumstances. Yeah, we got to get to their hearts, get to the hearts of children and teenagers, and we'll build a kinder nation and a healthier nation at the same time. What a wonderful combination.
It is a wonderful combination, and it is kinder and it is healthier. It's both and it's rare sometimes in life that we have such a possible win-win where we don't have to make choices against ourselves we can create a more compassionate world at the same and a more ethical relationship to life, and at the same time make ourselves healthier. I mean, we know from thousands of studies now that red meat increases heart disease risk. We're still learning some of the mechanisms by which it does. We know that meat consumption increases a level of a particular substance commonly referred to as TMAO. The more red meat someone eats, the more TMAO will be found in their blood and in their urine. Joel, what is TMAO, and how significant do you see it being in explaining why red meat consumption is so strongly associated with so many serious medical concerns, including heart attacks, strokes, kidney disease, and heart failure?
Absolutely great question, because we don't want food wars. We want scientific discussion and really well planned presentations to patients. In 2011, a small group of Cleveland Clinic researchers using artificial intelligence asked the question, what is in the blood that's harming arteries that we've not yet identified? And they came up with three potential candidates, and TMAO was the one that seemed to be the strongest candidate. It's a molecule. It officially is called trimethylamine oxide, but we use the four-letter abbreviation TMAO. They developed a way to measure it in the blood of humans. They went to the heart cath lab, and they found people with the worst blocked arteries had the highest blood levels. People with the cleanest arteries had the lowest. So just an observation suggesting maybe it was important. They went to the basic science lab, and they learned just what you said. When you eat egg yolk rich in choline, and when you eat red meat rich in L-carnitine, you have the ability through your gut and your liver to make this molecule, a metabolite it's called TMAO. And then they did basic science that TMAO adds to the damage LDL cholesterol does to your arteries. It blocks the benefit that HDL cholesterol does to your arteries. It causes your platelets to clump, which is what a clot is. And then they found it also promotes scarring or fibrosis in the heart and the kidneys. So now there are over 1,000 research studies very quickly in the last decade. Diabetic patients, heart failure patients, heart disease blocked patients, kidney patients, dementia patients. If you measure their TMAO, which is a available test I've ordered on probably 6,000 or 7,000 patients, if you measure TMAO levels, you will see them elevated. And then you tell the patient, stop your egg yolk, stop your red meat, and they will come crashing down into the normal range. We haven't yet had a study that shows that helps people live longer or live better, but this great explosion of science says we have done something very important. So it's a huge part of the argument to avoid eating red meat and actually egg yolk also.
Well, thank you for that explanation. You started your reply by saying we don't want food wars. We want science to obviously to base our food choices on the best science. But ketogenic diets have become quite popular of late. And I don't want to create a food war here, but there kind of is one out there about this. Joel, other than specific seizure disorders in kids where ketogenics have been shown to be applicable, can you, as a cardiologist in good conscience, recommend a ketogenic diet for weight loss or for the reduction of cancer risk or for any of the other concerns for which it is so often advocated today?
And to answer your question, because it's so important because of this amazing popularity of the ketogenic diet, I don't. And there's very clear reasons. It's basically the Atkins diet repackaged with some celebrities like Hugh Jackman and Halle Berry being commonly promoting and talking about this in a positive way. Low carb, high fat diets with a lot of animal products in them. About 25 to 30% of people have a genetic predisposition. They will absorb saturated fat and cholesterol from their diet with great rapidity, and the rest of us aren't quite as good at doing that. But you can, in 6 to 8 weeks on a ketogenic diet, get your cholesterol from 200 to 450. Now, people aren't checking, so they won't know. But if they come to my clinic, I'll check. And I will frequently identify people in that range. And the patient is frankly scared, but they weren't aware of that possibility. There actually are some physicians that promote the ketogenic diet that talk about their cholesterol going to the 600s. And, heart disease takes months to years to develop to the point of stroke or heart attack. It can't be good to have a cholesterol of 400, 500, or 600 for a month or two. But if you get off the diet and get back to something that's going to work for your physiology, you probably haven't done yourself any harm, but you have to test it. It's not just your waistline. You have to know what's going on with your blood sugar, your inflammation, and certainly your simple cholesterol panel. And then there's that obvious final part. Is there even a shred of data that says the ketogenic diet can keep clean arteries clean, can halt partially clogged arteries from getting worse with time, or actually reversing those that are already significantly clogged? And it's fantasy to say there's any data. There just isn't. And it's irresponsible, I think, for healthcare professionals to promote the ketogenic diet and not come back to the disclaimer. We have no data that this is safe for heart patients and should be discussed with your medical team, but probably shouldn't be done at all. So not a fan of the ketogenic diet. I mean, somebody wants to there is a plant-based keto. You want to do it for 5-6 days and drop 2-3 pounds. Probably going to sneak through that okay with a little modification in your diet, but go back to just a good old whole food plant-based food plate.
Well, ketogenic diets are very high in fat, obviously. There are some people who take the low-fat idea to an extreme. There are some folks who avoid not just bottled oils, but also nuts and seeds. And I certainly respect each person's right to select the foods that they think will help them best thrive. But several large studies have found that people who don't eat nuts and seeds aren't as healthy, don't live as long as people who do. I'm thinking of the Adventist Health Study, for example. It found that there was a 40% increased risk of death during the course of the study in people eating lower amounts of nuts and seeds. Now, Joel, we know that healthy fats are necessary for the absorption of fat-soluble nutrients, including many of the anti-cancer phytochemicals that are found in veggies. And healthy fats, such as those found in seeds and nuts, are also essential for brain health and mental well-being. What I want to ask you is, what does the evidence tell you about the role of seeds and nuts and olives and avocados in an optimally healthy diet?
Yes. And I would say one of the most popular handouts I give to patients during the course of a clinic week, or I post on social media, is a 2017 publication you can find at ornish.com, or a Food Revolution article on the medical data about nuts and seeds, but why in 2017 Dr. Ornish changed his protocol to allow people to plan to include them in their diet on a regular basis. And people just brighten up and they feel relieved. There's a little less stress. They have a little more variety in their diet. And what I'm really big on is the need to get adequate omega-3 fatty acids in the vegan, in the whole food plant strong diet. And that to me is teaching patients the chia, the flax, the hemp hearts. I do blood levels on omega-3 fatty acid levels. And America is low in omega-3, but our plant-based friends in American diets and worldwide are going to be low in omega-3. And you have to plan your diet to include these semi-controversial food choices. Again, hemp hearts, chia seeds, ground flax seeds, walnuts, very rich in omega-3. So they're my go-to nut. I don't want people eating a bag full, but 3, 4, 5 half walnuts a day on your bowl of oatmeal or in your salad, delicious, diversity, endothelial friendly, studied, and very, very good to boost your omega-3 for your brain power, for your cholesterol control, for your joints. Very important.
You just mentioned or referred to the endothelium. I want to talk a little bit about that. I've always found it to be a source of awe that each of us has in our bodies 50,000 miles of arteries and 50,000 miles of veins. This is, to me, an amazing reality. And there's a part of the human body that our listeners might not be familiar with called the endothelium that lines all of the 100,000 miles of veins and arteries in our bodies. It's extremely thin. It's literally only a single cell layer thin. And yet, because it lines so many miles of our veins and arteries, it weighs as much as our livers, which is saying a lot because the liver is the largest and heaviest organ in the human body. Joel, you've said elsewhere that the endothelium is the key to living a long and healthy life. Can you explain why you have said that?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to put another statistic out there, if we could take those arteries, peel off that single layer called the endothelium and lay it out, it's been calculated to be like 7 or 8 tennis courts. So you just think about that. I mean, you've got that inside your body only because it's so thin is it able to be compacted within our arteries. And so what's the big deal? Well, we used to talk solely about the risk of atherosclerosis. The endothelium is the defense. It is the barrier between maybe a fatty meal, a toxic meal with pesticides, whatever you ate, a very high sugar meal. Let's include a shout out for not excess sugar in the diet, acting on the artery to cause damage, to cause constriction, to cause reduced blood flow, and if repeated over and over, to cause plaques and clots that cause stroke and heart attack. The endothelium is the wall, very thin wall, but it's the barrier, the wallpaper, it's the defense line. And we need it to be healthy for brain function, heart function, lung function, kidney function, gut function, and certainly for sexual function. And one of the key roles of the endothelium is to make a lot of nitric oxide, NO, just the simplest molecule in the world, one nitrogen, one oxygen. Its identification won the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 1998. Yet we don't really have a drug for nitric oxide. We have food. We have leafy greens. We have beets. We have nuts. We have seeds. We have watermelon. Pine nuts are very rich in precursors. So we've learned if we could only measure easily our body's ability to make nitric oxide, there actually are saliva test strips you can buy online that are called nitric oxide saliva test strips. If you're curious, you can test how rich your saliva is in nitric oxide. And if it's not, you want to talk to somebody who knows how to boost it. But that's one way at it. There's specialty clinics like mine where we go a little bit further down the road, but it's one of those mindful acts. I'm going to eat to keep my endothelium healthy. It's an amazing concept. It's not as obvious as waistline or body weight or blood pressure that you can measure readily, but it's such an important concept.
Well, you mentioned that a healthy endothelium will produce more nitric oxide, and that's important for sexual health. I'm thinking of a very powerful documentary. I know you're familiar with it. Some of our listeners might be. It's called Game Changers. And there's a scene in that movie that was so impactful that after they filmed it, I've been told that most of the film crew changed to a plant-based diet right then because of what they saw. And what they saw was a prominent urologist, Dr. Aaron Spitz, give 3 elite athletes first meat-based dinners. One got organic chicken, one got grass-fed beef, and the other got organic pork. So these were high-quality meat products. And he then, the urologist, then measured how many erections these guys had and how hard their erections were while they slept that night after the meal. And then the next evening, he gave them plant-based dinners and gathered the same information while they slept that night. Now, what he found was startling, particularly to these athletes. Each of these guys had 3 to 5 times more frequent erections during the night after the plant-based meal than they did after the meat-based meal. And these erections, of which they had 3 to 5 times more, lasted on average 4 times longer after the plant-based meal. They averaged 45 minutes compared to 11 minutes for the same men after eating the meat dinner. And they also were harder and had a wider circumference. Now, Joel, you're the co-author of a book titled Vegan Sex. Can you explain why this would be the case, why these athletes experienced these differences?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was a remarkable scene that everybody has to watch the Game Changers and share it with other people so that they can get the insight on that scene and the rest of the movie, which was very powerful. But, it goes back partly to TMAO. You eat the first meal that the athletes, and these were 20-year-olds, they should have about the healthiest starters out there. But you eat that first meal, rich in saturated fat, high in salt, maybe added sugar, perhaps coming from GMO and factory farm sources rich in pesticides, herbicides. Our gut is very good at incorporating all of that into our bloodstream, and it's in our bloodstream and there are blood vessels. So you will lower your endothelial function. You will retard this normal ability of the body to keep arteries relaxed, keep the circulation at its optimum. You retard that. And it's been shown over and over, one poorly chosen meal. The famous research of Robert Vogel, MD, cardiologist, using a McDonald's sausage egg McMuffin. Other research using one large milkshake. But you get one poor quality meal, you can demonstrate endothelium is not working for 6, 7, 8 hours. And they showed that by using the erectile meter that Dr. Spitz has. But you keep doing it over and over. That's when you start to develop some permanent changes, permanent plaque. And the endothelium always can be restored to better health by changing. It's never too late, but don't wait till it becomes a permanent problem. The other thing just to mention about the endothelium, plant-based diets support healthy arteries, healthy endothelium. In an era where we're not quite done with COVID, we're hoping this is the year we'll stop having to change our lives drastically. So many cases of the suffering and even deaths from COVID have been clots in arteries and veins, with the science saying that this virus can attack and enter our endothelium. And there's no definite data that plant-strong eaters are avoiding the most serious cases. This has been brought up by some observers asking the question, can we get some statistics? But I wouldn't wait for the science. Eat healthier starting today, protect your heart, but also maybe build stronger arteries for this pandemic.
Well, we certainly know that people eating a healthy plant-strong diet, whole foods, plant-based diets, have lower rates of obesity, have lower rates of hypertension, have lower rates of heart disease, have lower rates of almost all of the comorbidities, as they're called, that lead to worse outcomes in people who do get COVID-19, who become infected with the virus. And so it would seem to me that you increase your odds of doing better if you get infected if you're eating a healthy diet. And I think that seems to be pretty substantially solid in the science right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the ways people can assess it, there is a blood test that is widely available, not ordered enough, called the high sensitivity C-reactive protein. All labs do it. I would consider it pretty routine, but I wouldn't say that's necessarily the opinion of everybody. It's a blood test that shows if your immune system, as reflected by inflammation, is under control or excessive. And it ties in to the idea that if you were to get the virus with already an inflamed and overactive immune system, it may be already primed to go overreacting and develop that cytokine storm and the severe illness and clots that people have gotten. Well, there's a randomized study at New York University in heart patients. Eat plant-based or eat the American Heart Association kind of standard heart diet. The C-reactive protein was the lowest in the randomized study with the plant diet. We know you can lower excessive inflammation as measured by that simple blood test in the science world. So let's all start doing it, and let's make sure our family members do it. You know, eat plant strong for the pandemic is a perfectly reasonable statement.
It is. And I think it's just another reason, another benefit that we can gain through eating a healthy plant-based diet. I want to ask you one more question about COVID. Last year, Medscape Medical News reported that among people hospitalized with COVID-19, those who were deficient in vitamin D when they were admitted had a nearly 4-fold increase in the odds of dying from the disease. And importantly, these results were independent of the comorbidities known to be affected by vitamin D deficiency. Joel, the evidence that low vitamin D levels are a major predictor for bad COVID outcomes is increasingly compelling. A nearly 4-fold increase in death rate if someone's vitamin D level is below 20 nanograms per milliliter is staggering. What do our listeners need to know about vitamin D?
Right. Vitamin D is, some people call it a vitamin. Some people think it acts more like a hormone, important in our bone health. And we want to focus on healthy bones, long life in the plant-based community for sure. We want to get our weight-bearing exercise, but we need vitamin D. We may also need vitamin K2 from natto or a few other plant-based sources in our diet. But vitamin D plays an important role in the way our immune system responds. And you're right, the observation that a low vitamin D level is associated with more severe cases of COVID response is very concerning. And perhaps a year ago, there should have been a very loud public health message saying either take a small but steady amount, and I would call that maybe 2,000 international units of vitamin D3, or go to your doctor and get your blood checked. It's a very simple, inexpensive blood test. What's my vitamin D level? I've done that on 10,000 plus patients. I don't care if they're plant-based or they're meat-based. It's a very frequent nutritional deficiency. And with the normal level being typically over 30, many people are 9, 11, 12. At that level, your immune system is really impaired. So either assume that you're low and take that small amount of daily vitamin D3, or get it checked and eat a lot of mushrooms. Mushrooms are one of the best sources to get vitamin D. They're also just an amazingly good source for many other parts of your health, including your immune health. They contain something called beta glucans that you and Ocean have written about so eloquently. So I love that kind of mushrooms are enjoying a renaissance right now. And they're plants, another plant that will help your health, very much so.
I want to refer to something we were talking about a few minutes ago. We were talking about the the study done in Game Changers, the documentary, in which these guys, these elite young male athletes, were tested and found to have stronger erections and longer lasting erections. And when they ate plant-based instead of meat. What I want to ask you, though, is that study was performed on these guys. And of course, it's easier to put a scanner on a guy's private parts than it would be to do the equivalent with a woman. But I want to ask you, Joel, would the same thing hold true for women? I mean, in other words, does a diet rich in plants and whole foods support women's sexual function as well?
Yes, there's far less data. I mean, there's the general health benefits of eating a plant-strong diet. It favors a more normal body weight. There's no fat shaming here, but a more normal body weight is associated with less chronic diseases. It favors better skin, more glowing skin, better hair, rich in vitamin C and lysine and other components that naturally help our bodies make collagen for the cosmetic external reason. It favors better sleep and more energy during the day. I mean, the sexual activity is more than blood flow. It's all these other components, but at its end, it is predominantly the ability to massively increase blood flow for a period of time. And that is as important to the female sexual response as it is to the male sexual response. So there are studies that there are women with sexual dysfunction that have responded to Viagra, which is an endothelial-friendly prescription drug. Well, if that's the case, they're also going to respond to a whole food plant diet, even if the research dollars haven't really poured into that aspect of benefits. But I would be very confident to say that the best plan to maintain your sexual interest and your sexual abilities would be to start as early in life eating well. And that's why that message from the Game Changers was so awesome, that, these were actually 20-year-olds making the case, not the very endearing older couple. I think they were talking in the classic documentary Forks Over Knives. That's also inspiring, but let's get to the 20-year-olds and the athletes and get the message out that this is sexy, sexy food.
Maybe you should write a book or create a movie titled 50 Shades of Green.
I think that would be so awesome, starring the dashing Ocean Robbins.
Well, I sometimes think that a Whole Foods plant-strong diet should come with a warning label. Whether you're male or female, your libido and your sexual interest may increase when you eat this way.
Yeah, just like the pharmaceutical ads on TV, some ad for chia seeds followed by 32 disclaimers how your health is going to improve. Warning, warning.
Well, there are people out there who believe, this is I think, fairly widespread idea, that soy products undermine male sexual function, that the phytoestrogens in soy cause man boobs to grow, cause male penises to shrink and to become non-responsive. I mean, there is a lot of literature out there. I don't mean in the medical literature, but in the in the internet world of people with making these allegations about soy. Joel, can you summarize for us what is known scientifically about the relationship between soy foods and men's health and vitality, and for that matter, cancer risk in women?
Yeah, absolutely. And the summary would be the real enemy is animal foods that actually have estrogen, either because they come from a female animal that was slaughtered for our dinner, or they were treated with hormones to grow faster and quicker, like milk that's treated with a hormone that is estrogenic, or be concerned about the environment, what are called xenoestrogens, plastics, phthalates, fragrances, thermal receipts everywhere that are known to actually shrink infantile penis size. That's actually science. That's published science that eating too much chicken in the mother with the phthalates that come from factory farming can affect their male child's organ size. It's scary as can be, but also affects thyroid function and fertility and overall health and wellness. That should scare the public to stay away from factory farm foods and plastics everywhere. Phytoestrogens, plant-based estrogens, actually act more as an anti-estrogen than they do any similarity to the natural hormone that both men and women have in their blood. And they actually block the effects, particularly in breast tissue and breast receptors. So to answer your question, if you don't want to get breast cancer, studies suggest have soy products like tempeh, tofu, edamame in your diet. If you've had breast cancer, discuss it with your medical team, but the science suggests you're not increasing your risk. And for estrogen receptor negative women, you're lowering your risk of recurrent breast cancer episodes. And for men, the answer is moderation. I don't suggest drinking 4 gallons of soy milk a day, but using soy milk as we normally do, having some edamame, tempeh, and tofu through the week, absolutely a sex-friendly, and a cholesterol, heart-friendly choice that I would endorse for sure.
We've been talking a lot about the endothelium and its role in heart disease, its role in health in general. There was a cardiologist at the University of Maryland who recruited volunteers to have 2 meals on separate days while a device was on their arm that monitored their endothelial function. And his study has famously become known as the Egg McMuffin study. I've heard you refer to this before, Joel. Can you tell us what happened and why this is so important for our listeners to understand?
Yes, that's Dr. Robert Vogel, who actually was my mentor at the University of Michigan before he moved to Maryland, and now he's in Denver. He actually spent a year as the medical director of the Pritikin program, so he is very much entrenched in the good science of preventing heart disease. But he took healthy volunteers on 2 different mornings, and they had an apparatus on their arm that is used in research studies to measure endothelial function. How much blood flow can your arm artery provide your hand at different circumstances? And one was to measure for 7 hours after a McDonald's sausage egg McMuffin, and one was to measure the same number of calories, but a very different meal that was not rich in saturated fat, salt, and processed foods. And there was, for peaking at 4 hours, but for a full 7 hours, there was a reduction in blood flow, a reduced endothelial function following the sausage egg McMuffin, the McDonald's experiment, as it's called. Scary, scary information. And it's been repeated over and over, as I said. You can just shake it up and make it a fat-rich milkshake or a very high-fat diet of any kind, and you'll see endothelial dysfunction for a number of hours. But if that's breakfast, lunch, and dinner, if it's McDonald's for breakfast, KFC for lunch, and Arby's for dinner, you're basically living in an endothelial constricted state, which is how we develop chronic coronary disease and chronic vascular disease.
Would you say, in concluding, that a whole foods, plant-strong diet may be the most powerful thing any of us can do to dramatically increase our odds of living a long, vibrant, and vital life filled with lots of positive energy?
I would say that, and I'm very much a student of the cutting edge anti-aging longevity science, rapamycin, metformin, gene splicing, CRISPR-9, all these wonderful words we'll talk about maybe next year on this summit. But right now, without a doubt, the quality of your food is the biggest determinant of illness or health, of vitality or fatigue, of prescription drugs or prescription free, of needing the medical system or not really needing the medical system. It is a extremely powerful tool we all should embrace and teach everybody to embrace.
Joel, it's been a joy for me to watch you over the years become one of our most passionate and knowledgeable spokespeople on behalf of something that can provide such extraordinary benefits to all of us. It's been a pleasure for me today to hear you share your wisdom and what you've learned from over 30 years as a cardiologist at the forefront of treating disease with the most powerful medicine on the planet, which are plant-strong foods. On behalf of Ocean and myself and everyone involved in the food revolution, I want to thank you for your beautiful work, your compassionate work, your dedicated work, and of course, for being with us today.
Well, thank you so much for you being the leaders and having such an important role that's ongoing in my life too.
We've been sharing a delightful and fascinating conversation with world-renowned cardiologist Dr. Joel Kahn, author of The Whole Heart Solution and The Plant-Based Solution, among many other books. Joel, thank you so much for telling it like it is, for your eloquent, passionate clarity, and for your partnership in the food revolution.
Thank you.
This concludes our interview, but our work is just getting started. If you feel supported and encouraged by what you just heard and want to share it with people you care about, if you want permanent access to 24 amazing presentations and transcripts, then check this out. You can get a download and a transcript of the entire Food Revolution Summit, plus a huge collection of ebooks, courses, trainings, recipes, and videos. And this empowerment package is available for a huge 50% discount between now and the end of the summit. For more information, please visit foodrevolution.org/empowerment. Again, that's foodrevolution.org/empowerment. Thank you for joining us in the Food Revolution, and we wish you and those you love good health always.